plenary session of today, where we open with critical talks by our advisory board. And 4 of our advisory board members are here. And just to frame this session, we have asked them to do what they have been doing for the last 3.5 years, which is to really challenge and encourage us to really think beyond. Yesterday we talked about our research project for those who couldn't be here yesterday. And they always challenge us to think, so what can we learn from this research project for the critical societal challenges out there? So really challenging us on the so what question. So we asked them to be really critical and also a little bit controversial in their talks today as well. So please don't get angry at them. They've been invited to do that. And the idea is that rather than having 3 talks and then having discussion, we are trying to have group discussions in between. So this does require some discipline in terms of timing. I've asked the advisory board members to speak in 10 minutes, which is of course very short. So thank you for agreeing to do that. So before, the chair of our advisory board member, Tim O'Riordan, will introduce our panel. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of the flow, and everything is more or less 15 minutes delayed. So we're going to start with Tim introducing the session and the speakers, and then we're going to have 3 talks. First by Edina on ecological sustainability and the urgency of transformative social innovation, and then we have Ariel on exclusion and inclusion dynamics, and then Gilda looking back at 25 years of policy, innovation policy. And then in between, after each speaker, we're going to have rounds of discussion with table hosts at the tables where you are. And then we're going to open up, as far as we have time left, panel discussion, and then we have a break. Before I give the word to Tim, I would like to introduce the chair of our advisory board member, Tim O'Riordan. And I tried to memorize this, but Tim has done so much in his life that it's impossible. He's emeritus professor at the University of East Anglia of environmental sciences, and he's a big name in the field of sustainability governance. So a lot of a lot of people who have studied environmental sustainability governance have read his work. And he's also a deputy lieutenant of the County of Norfolk, a former sheriff of the city of Norwich, and a fellow of the British Academy. And in 2010 he was honored with the Order of the British Empire. And he has focused on the realm of sustainability science research, and he has been associated with governments, business and community organizations all over the world, but mostly in the European Union. And I can go on like this for not much time, but I don't think he would appreciate that. Warm welcome to Tim, and thank you very much for being the chair of our advisory board for so long and encouraging us. And the word is to you.
Welcome everyone, how nice to see you all. We're a friendly lot, the people who are in the advisory board, and even more friendly lot, the people who are listening to us. Essentially, the role of the advisory board is threefold. Everything is threefold. It makes life easy to keep things in 3. First of all, we try to give a sense of perspective. We've all been around a bit, and we know a little bit about what's going on in the area of transformation, governance, politics and interaction, and social change and dialogue. So we have that kind of perspective, and you'll see this from our friends, my friends, or your friends in a few minutes. Secondly, we do have this role of being critical, and remember the Roman word critical comes from the original Roman, means that you are judging and assessing and thoughtfully commentating. It doesn't mean you're destructive and negative. A good critic should balance positive and negative, and this is certainly what we do, with a bit more of the positive than the negative. And the third one, I think, really relates to how today has worked out, and yesterday has worked out, this idea of where do we go? What is all this about? What's going on out there that we need to capture? So in some way we're a kind of Wi-Fi, bringing lots of things into the drift team and to the whole of the transit group. And I think that's been a very important relationship that's made the role of the advisory group. And I've been on 3 different advisory groups going back into the middle of the Dark Ages with drift. and actually always found this a very exciting and enjoyable experience. In Drift, I have to say, is the most amazing operation, and I do have to commend them, all of them, to it. Dirk is sitting there representing the whole of the show, everyone you know in the Drift scene, but everyone who has anything to do with Drift knows that this is a remarkable operation, and long may it continue, because it is very special. So in the context of all of this, I want to introduce Edina, and we're going to make sure that we keep 10 minutes, so I've already finished my few minutes, but I will try to wrap up at the end on the basis of what we're hearing. But in your discussions, try to formulate a commentary, a critical comment. It could be the form of a question, or it could be the form of a comment. And at the end of the 3 presentations, and you've got 3 different, and the questions will come up on the screen. I hope they will, I'm sure they will. Then I'm going to ask the tables to identify who would like to give one of those for the round 1, and one of those for round 2, and one of those for round 3. It's a lottery. It's a total lottery. It's based upon whether I like the look of you, whether your body language is particularly strong, whether you plead, or in some way indicate that you've got something special to offer. And on the basis that I'll point to you in regards to the question. And then we'll sum up. That's how it's going. So Edina, from Hungary. We started all this in 2014, January 2014, and I remember spending my time in Rotterdam with my friends saying, how are we going to have a really interesting advisory group? First of all, it had to have women on it, that was vital. Secondly, it had to have people who have a very range of background, practitioner policy. And thirdly, it had to have people who really would like to stay the course, get stuck into it, and be very effectively part of the whole process. So Edina meets all of these requirements wonderfully well. Comes from the Green Development Institute, is both a practitioner and a policy person, but particularly also a researcher, stirs things up. Hungary isn't the easiest place to do work on green matters these days, but she does a wonderful job keeping going against sometimes forces of darkness. So Edina, you have our listening ears and our great admiration.
Thank you. Thank you, team, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. Good morning. Thank you for making this session. And since Tim introduced me so well, I will jump right into the talk and start with this quote from Wangari Maathai, which I think very rightly summarizes what I'm going to talk about. And this quote says, "We tend to put the environment last because we think the first thing we have to do is eliminate poverty. But you can't reduce poverty in a vacuum. You are doing it in an environment." So my argument here today to you is that you really need to connect environmental and social aspects in your work in social innovation. And maybe this sounds obvious, maybe you feel like it is already happening and what am I talking about here, but I would feel like to challenge you to think about this a bit more, and especially in the light of strong and just sustainability. So not just any definition of sustainability, but strong, meaning that we have to stay within ecological limits or planetary boundaries, and just that we have to provide equal access to resources and benefits as well as equitable burden sharing. So what I'm proposing, well, we checked the assumption whether social innovation initiatives really combine these 2 aspects and whether they really provide more sustainable solutions in a research project that we concluded a few years ago. And here you cannot read everything, I'm sure, but this is a local exchange initiative in Hungary, and this is Transition Bekelle and Transition Town Totnes. And here is an eco-village from Sweden, and you can see that they do combine these 2 aspects, but maybe not as much as we assume, and maybe they are not as sustainable in a strong and just way as much as we assume. So what I'm proposing now is that for social innovation to become really transformative, it has to combine both these aspects in the light of strong and just sustainability. You might not like this kind of representation so much, so here is another one, the donut. The donut representing the safe and just space for humanity, the outer boundary standing for ecological limits, and the inner boundary representing social limits. And what I'm trying to propose and argue now is that transformative social innovation should be within the donut, or should make real efforts to be within the donut. And again, please don't underestimate this challenge. I would like to take the example of climate change, because it's well known and it's one of the environmental ecological limits, and we have quite clear indicators in terms of representing where we stand. One of them is the carbon footprint, and here you can see European countries and their average per capita carbon footprints. You can see that there is great variation from quite large footprints in Luxembourg and Estonia and much smaller in Romania and Latvia. But if we project the sustainable footprint on this graph, you can see that even the smallest ones are well above it. So we are going above this limit, and I know there is variation in countries. For example, in Hungary, the poorest segments of society are below this sustainable limit, of course ecologically, not socially. But in other countries like the UK, even the poorest are above this limit. So the challenge in front of us is quite great. And at this point, you might want to ask how some of the social innovation initiatives are doing from this respect. And I selected an eco-village for you. It's the Findhorn eco-village in Scotland, and they themselves commissioned a study to measure their carbon footprint, and they found that it's about as big as the average UK footprint. So now they are making clear efforts to reduce it, but they are not. The assumption was that they should have lower footprints, but they themselves saw that it's not true. I know not all eco-villages are like this, but we really have to stand up to this challenge in social innovation. Okay, let me show you some examples that I think successfully combine the social and the ecological aspect. And this is an initiative from Hungary, Biobriquettes. It's a project initiated in northern Hungary where some of the poorest communities live. And these communities suffer from fuel poverty as well, which means that in winter, to keep themselves warm, they cut down forests illegally around themselves, as well as burn household waste, which means burning plastic as well as rubber, which are really damaging for all kinds of reasons. So this non-profit organization working with them came up with the solution that in the summer, using agricultural waste available locally, they involved these poor groups in making biobriquettes. Thereby they are providing employment as well as working on community development as well. But in the winter, then these communities have some fuel to burn. So they very successfully combined environmental and social aspects in their work. Another example is from India, again from Tamil Nadu, where a great part of the population lives on less than $1 a day. And poverty and not having enough nutrition is a really big issue, as well as these populations are feeling the impacts of climate change, mostly in the form of desertification. So SCAD, Social Change and Development in Tamil Nadu, came up with this idea to plant fruit trees with the involvement of the local population. Trees provide food, fuel, shelter, as well as help combat desertification. And in addition to planting fruit trees, they also help the people to establish organic kitchen gardens. And this way they can have nutrition locally, they don't have to ship the food in, as well as create income generation opportunities for the local population. Again, a great example of combining ecological and social aspects in the work, helping the poor in a way that is ecologically sustainable. So, coming towards your discussion time, I would like to recap my argument and argue that for social innovation to be transformative, it really has to combine ecological and social aspects while subscribing to the notion of strong and just sustainability. This is a really important part. Not just combine, but do it in a way that you stay within ecological limits in an equitable way. So my question to you for the discussion is this: how strong is this connection in your work between social and environmental sustainability, the social and environmental aspect, and how could you make it stronger? Thank you.
I'm delighted to introduce to you Ariel. Now we have, as you know, the transit program and link with Latin America, and particularly Argentina. One of the great tragedies, but then it does affect carbon movement, so we have to think about these things. We never had a meeting in Buenos Aires, which I would love to have done, because this man would be a wonderful host. But nevertheless, we do have a number of our friends from Argentina and from Brazil in the meeting today. I'm sure you've met many of them. They're very special, and they offer a very distinctive and important extra dimension to what we're doing. Ariel is a mixture. He comes from a government background, where he worked in social innovation. He's also in a university called Kimlish, and Kimlish is a beer, so just get your head around that. It's not a university, it's a beer. So this man's a walking brewery. And the third bit is he's actually very much involved in the social section side to the main power company of Argentina, which has got a social foundation, and Ariel is involved in directing and organising that. So, my friend Ariel, with all your travels and your great, wonderful insights, please address us.
Thank you, team. You have raised the bar so much. I have to meet the expectation. Thank you all for joining us in this early session this morning. I have already complained that this is the unfriendly slot, after last night dinner and party, but I'll try to make my presentation as much interactive as possible to keep things going. Okay? Well, I want to talk this morning with you about inclusion-exclusion dynamics of social innovation, of transformative social innovation. And I believe that we all speak from a certain perspective, and I speak from the South. What do I mean by that? I mean, we all speak with a certain perspective that is rooted in our experience, our ideological, epistemological, normative, and political values that, shape our worldview. And I speak from the South. And what is the South? Well, this is the South. This is no digital fabrication or mashup. It's an actual Google Earth image of San Isidro. San Isidro is in Buenos Aires northern suburbs. It's one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country, and you can see the mansions here, next to these slums. This is just a Google Earth image with some 3D rendering layer over it. Okay, so it is a deep, unequal South, and it's deeply unequal not only within our countries in terms of all kinds of resources, economic resources, of course, intellectual resources, environmental resources are unevenly distributed, and also at the international level. Okay, so I wish our landscape would be like this, with these beautiful wine farms and these solar sunflowers, these Bangkok sunflowers. But as critical researchers on transformative social innovation, I think that we should properly frame the bigger picture and frame the exclusion dynamics also behind these processes. And what do I mean by that? I mean the environmental depth that is behind that. I don't know if you know, but in the 1970s, a group of Latin American scholars proposed the Latin American world model. It was an answer to the Meadows report, to the Limits to Growth report. And they claimed this environmental depth. All these critical talks from the South then led to the reports of the 80s, the Brundtland report addressing environmental and sustainable development as well, regarding the social and environmental issues at the same time. So I think it's good to recall some of this discussion when we frame nowadays some of the inclusion and exclusion discussions in transformative social innovation. Okay, so to make it more interactive, you know what are the CO2 emissions per capita of the Netherlands annually, the latest data we've got? Take a guess. 8? 8 million. Someone else? Come on. It's a quiz show. The transit team is selecting the prize. 25. Your answer. Come on. 8. What? How much?
You do it for everyone.
Pardon? Yeah, that's right. 9.8. What's the European Union, the EU26, with team value? What's the European average?
The average.
So, about that, a little bit below. 6.9.
They're winning the quiz.
China, the world's biggest polluter, the bad guys. The bad guys are Americans.
20.
You know the Paris Agreement, but well, China, I mean, we put lots of, strength in them. Or no, more than that.
20.
20, it's per capita. There are too many.
5.
No, it's above the European Union average, but it's below you. What's Argentina's average?
Argentina.
3.
3.
8.7.
0.4. 85% of our primary energy matrix is based on fossil fuels, but 51% of that fossil fuels are gas. It's gas. Less than 2% is carbon, so it's much more cleaner than most Western Europe and Eastern Europe energy matrix. But Brazil's, for instance, energy matrix is largely based on big hydropower. So it's one of the greenest in the world. It's 2.2 per capita in their annual emissions. Okay? If you look at the tiny country as Paraguay, it's an energy producing country because of all the hydro. I need to. It's much less. But okay, well, what do I want to discuss with this? I mean, shall we in Argentina want to discuss a current example we are undergoing, some tensions regarding this? Shall we foster renewable energy in Argentina in this context? For us, it is much more expensive than creating energy with fossil fuels. Shall we? What do you think? If you were in government and you've got about roughly 30% of your population below poverty line, would you foster renewables? Yes. Okay, yes, I agree with you. We should. And actually, that's what we are doing in southern Patagonia, this beautiful landscape. We are building large wind farms. We are buying Danish Vestas windmills at YPF. And, also in northern Argentina, in the Puna region, we are building one of Latin America's largest solar power farms. That's 4,000 meters up in the Andes. Very high. Very high, there are no clouds, so it has a good capacity factor. But what's the side effect of this? It's the bill. Energy prices, nowadays, last year, they have gone to history records high in dollars, okay? So the amount of wage that poor people are allocating to pay for energy is the highest in history. So behind all these inclusion movements towards renewable energy, there are also side effects regarding social exclusion. So just wanted to recall this very simple example to remind you about the dialectics of inclusion and exclusion dynamic of social innovation. And for this, it's also good to recall the Belgian surrealist artist René Magritte and his painting Hegel's Holidays, his tribute to Hegel and Marx, and dialectics, because there are these dialectics of inclusion, exclusion behind social innovation. So my question to you today, this morning, is what are the exclusion dynamics in your work, and what could you do to make it more inclusive? Understanding that it's not a dichotomy, it's a spectrum. So you can always make it more inclusive in terms of framing, understanding that there are also exclusion movements undergoing. Okay? And just to remind you that it keeps going, I live with René Magritte's painting. Okay, thank you so much.
We are coming to the third speaker of our group of advisory committee members. There's really a chance of you beginning to come settled. That would be nice. You're picking up, I'm sure you're picking up a message, which we're going to, I'll say a bit more in my concluding remarks, that we're challenging ourselves in this process from the 4 members of the advisory panel here, and Francis will talk about in a few minutes. We're challenging you that TSI is actually becoming a much bigger phenomenon than even we began to think about back in 2014. And I'll say a bit more about it at the end. But this is what I want you to stretch your mind. The point about these little conversations you're having is to stretch your mind and to be self-critical. Maybe we should have done it this way, maybe we should include that. Don't feel frightened to say these things, even after 4 years of EU spending. You've still done a fantastic job. I'll say that very nicely to you. But my final member of the panel who will speak is Gilda Farrell. Gilda comes with a background in the European Commission. She has a lot of interest in social transformation and in enterprise and things around these issues, but above all, she's a very committed environmentalist herself. She now lives and works in Portugal, and she's actively engaged in all of these things. But the most important thing for me about Gilda is that she's probably the most challenging of the 4 of us when I'm chair. And I sometimes go to sleep hearing Gilda coming into my ear from the left-hand side. So, Gilda, you are...
But not when you're in a transit meeting.
Good morning. Good morning to everybody, and thank you, team, for a nice presentation. I am sufficiently old to have the opportunity to look at 25 years ago, when we were pioneers of innovation. I'm sorry for you. In January this year, a good friend of mine, who was a fighter against fascism in Portugal, came to home. He's 83, saying, listen, Gilda, we have to gather the people who for 25 years were involved in innovation in the rural areas in Europe. And I said, come on, if you want me to clean the dust from the skeleton, go away, I am not going to do it. And he said, no, come on, let's discuss it. And I said, okay, let's look at the 25 years behind us, having an eye in the future. We have to be critical and not nostalgic. And I'm going to talk about this combination of nostalgia and criticism. In the 90s, in a particular context of the European Union, the Commission decided to have the Leader Initiative. The Leader Initiative was an amazing opportunity for innovation in the rural areas. It settled in the rural territories, half of the European territories, the possibility to do something that I call the triangle of transformation. Decentralization, so give the power to the territories on the possibility to decide and the possibility to organize access. The second aspect of the innovation was reappropriation. get back to the sense of property, of belonging, of responsibility. And the third part of the triangle was self-regulation. Self-regulation of the existing interests, self-regulation of the investment, etc. And it was an amazing opportunity that rooted in rural areas the possibility to be creative, to foster the role of individual and collective creativity. So this leader initiative, I had the opportunity to be the vice director of the observatory that was helping the collaboration between the Finnish and the Greeks, the Scottish and the Portuguese, etc. at that time. And we were full of hope. And today, 25 years later, I have at my home the commissioner, the members of the parliament, the members of the European Commission, the activists from the ground that were discussing that. Some people, frustrated, said, come on, we were so enthusiastic. We were leading the transformation of Europe. Why are we sad today? Sad people. And they concluded that it has been destroyed by the administration. And this is a fact, I think, that this capacity to be innovative at a decentralized level has somehow created a country power. So even the roles of the mayors have changed. Instead of being aware on and occupied and responsible only for small infrastructure, they were strategical thinkers, gathering people around the idea of partnerships, being able to discuss with the regional and national authorities on a completely different role for them. So it was an absolute, silent revolution without arms. And Camilo, my friend who came to me after, the revolution in Portugal, found a place in this silent revolution. But, the procedural part has gained strength. And 25 years later, the innovative aspect has been destroyed. Procedural, inertia, administration was the word to qualify the result. Why is that? We have to ask ourselves what is going wrong today that we may regret in the future. And I think what was the problem of this initiative? First it was not an eye on citizenship. It was not a political project on reinforcing the strength of the citizens. We were believers in the magic of the market. We wanted to put the identity of the rural areas in the market, local products, attractive touristic premises, folklore, museums, etc. The magic of the market. We have forgotten at that time that we need a political project. Second, the vision was sectorial. The funding was allocated to innovation in services, to innovation in local products, to innovation in tourism, to innovation, and the idea of good practices. Good practices, it means self-containers of even innovative practices were not related to any bigger political project. So, this meeting that could have turned into nostalgia, I wanted to turn it into light. And I think to turn into light after 25 years of this experience, we had to look at how to make the best of the transversal values of our own practices. How to turn it into a movement that dare take the risk to stand for real change, to support what the values of our Europe is: justice, equality, the commons, etc. So I think we have to look at the components. You know, this is a synthetic view of market, environment, society, governance, and see what is transversal, what are the values that are emerging from our action, and can we turn it into a more political project? Can we have a broad view beyond our own, small enthusiasm or ephemeral enthusiasm on something, and share a political vision? And I think this is the future, not for you, because I will be there, to have nostalgia 25 years later. So, could we progress towards fair access to new democratic institutions, to change the legal rules and frames that finally, if we don't dare to, if we don't stand for that, they will destroy it, as it happens with this leader initiative that is covering 50% of the European territories, not less than that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your magical and very powerful presentation. And again, here's the question. When we imagine ourselves in the future looking back at our work today, what may be our blind spots regarding transformative change? We're recording all of this stuff. So the tables have all had a recorder or a rapporteur or whatever, and there will be some overall document at the end of this morning's session, because we feel we are trying to challenge you, and we feel that you are responding, and we can't obviously get all of that in the next few minutes. So what I'd like is any one of the tables who feels they really would like to say something on question 1, which is on the issue of are we really ecologically and socially connected in our TSI activity, Edina's challenge. Anyone like to raise a hand and say we desperately want to make that question clear to all of us? But all the questions that you do come up with will be recorded, so the fact we don't know that, it would be nice for us to share at least one question from one table. So is anyone from one table feeling they would like to say something powerful and positive in a minute on that question?
Yeah, about the question 1, about the question 1, we talked about different projects that are conducted by the people here around the table, and we also talked about the cultural aspect of the transition towards a more ecological world, and it's a combination between social and ecological aspects, of course, and this cultural aspect address the way to share knowledge, for example, and to translate scientific knowledge. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Okay. I was just saying that we talked about culture and also about knowledge, and and the way that academics can translate their knowledge to share with a broadened public. And about culture, it was about the necessity of changing the way of life and the way of understanding what we are doing now towards a more ecological society.
Fine, we're not going to have a lot of this, I just want very quick responses. On question 2, which was raised by Ariel around inclusion, particularly as we go through transformation, are we really taking into account those who may be left behind in the process? Anyone reacting to that from any of the tables? Hands up? A comment? Here's a gentleman over here. Can you stick a microphone under his mouth? And he'll wave.
One thing is, if those two do not come together, then the social innovation is not enough. For example, with those solar collectors, they should be on the houses of the people in the favelas and belong to them. Then there might be some real change.
Very good. And then on the third question, which is one raised by Gilda, which is, I think, the most challenging of the three, the normative. Are we really visionary? Are we really looking at a society that doesn't have to spend all of its time on the nitty-gritty of getting there, but being there? What is it when we're there? Who would like to make a comment on that? Renee or Alex?
Yeah, we had a really good discussion on this one at this table, and we talked about how a blind spot looking back in 100 years' time might be that people said they didn't have a guiding myth in their culture. There was a loss of values in the culture. There was nothing that animated that civilization at that time to act. So we have all of these pressing problems that we know that we should be addressing, but we're not. And the fundamental reason is that we lack a kind of animating myth in our culture. So we also looked, for example, at technology and talked about how disruptive technologies are likely to kind of increase. So we discussed whether that was a blind spot, but really the blind spot would be people were looking back in 50 years' time. They never thought about the purpose of that technology. They never questioned the purpose of that technology. And in turn, that's because there wasn't an animating myth in the culture.
Thank you. Renee, do you want to add anything to that? Shall you give
that's it, what I will say. It's been said, right, obviously, that some markets are part of the problem. And about markets, I would like to say, the sort of bad masters that, they should be making service. And I think there's really a need also for higher prices on resources and fossil fuel use. And that also helps to deal with the problem that a lot of these initiatives, they're just culturally very homogeneous. So they don't reach out to a lot of groups in society which will be affected by those higher prices. That's one of the things that we mentioned. On the issue of a political project, I think we all wholeheartedly agree that something like that is needed, something to believe in and live for. And that so your administration as being part of the problem, I think was really well put. Of course, the problem is bigger than that. It's the political system, the high politics, which are often the problem. It's a kind of media game, and it will not be a source of transformative change. Whereas the micro politics of these initiatives, of course, I think are bringing something forward. Now, so we need this to be more of a movement, sort of a real societal project, which is hopeful. And I think working with reformers, people within regimes, within powerful positions, of which I think some are here, I think also, I think is a useful strategy for that.
Thank you very much indeed, Renee. Now, my friends, we have 10 minutes left. I'm standing looking up the Rhine on a lovely September morning. But what's the name of the river? It's near enough. I'm a geographer, so it doesn't matter.
Can we react?
No. I'm sorry, but if you go, unless we don't have the time to put some reflective comments in, there will be a chance for us to react. If Amazon is authoritarian, but we agreed that we would have a paper coming out of this, and the advisory board will comment on the paper and put their comments into the final document, which is the reason why I'm not suggesting it. Because I feel we need to have a little bit of perspective at this point about all of the things raised and what we've done as an advisory panel over the last 4 years. You mind, is that all right, Gilda? Are you really upset? Would you like to then say, here you are, you can react. Just give it a thing.
Yeah. Let's react.
Ariel.
Please. Well, I had one of the best feedbacks from Gilda to my presentation, and I would like to take into account René's comments also. And I'm sorry if it sounded too reductionistic. I'm sorry for my pronunciation. Of course, I mean, I am aware that we should distinguish between energy production system and energy building systems and go towards more decentralized energy productions, more autonomous energy production systems. But my point was, in the transition, there are hard choices that we have to make, you know? And in developing countries, we are facing those decisions every day, every time, in much more struggling environments. And that was just my point, and to recall the political economy side of this, because otherwise, I think that we can miss the point. For instance, you know, most of international agreements regarding emissions, you know, from my point of view, they are completely flawed. You know, they are missing the point. We are not discussing technology access. We are not discussing funding flows. Only just partial equilibrium on certain emissions. So my point was just to raise that question, and that leads to deeper political worldviews. I mean, I think that the answer is what Gilda has commented. You know, to have that some, as Alex also have just commented, some myth that, you know, can recreate some certain worldviews at the national level, at the international level as a whole. But that's my point. Thank you.
Yeah, I criticize him for being a conventional economist. The cost of investments should be distributed among everyone without criteria. And that is why I am criticizing, because the idea of commons could completely change the picture. Those who consume more have to pay more, and those who consume less have to pay less. And I think we have to balance this in our vision of, you know, to restore some justice. But my comment on the political issue is that we don't have to be only innovative. We have to create resistance and individual capacity to take risks. I know for researchers it's a problem, this, because you have to produce, to publish, etc., and academia, you know, doesn't allow for too many risks. But I think if we have to stand as individuals, innovators, resistant, we have to take the risk of facing the reality. And I think, you know, among our good humor, our capacity to laugh, we have to stand for what we believe. And what we believe has to be built, because we have lost sight. And I think from this assembly, we have to gain, and from others, the capacity to look at what I call utopias, of course, because I am Marxist from training, an activist, but as well, you know, our capacity to formulate prototopias. It means prototypes of contribution to our dreams. And I think it's the link between ourselves as individuals standing for justice, for a decent life in our world, changing our behaviors, our capacity to look at ourselves and related, interacting with the others, to stand for justice, for dignity. We will be those resistant innovators that we need to recover a bit of dream of the future. Thank you.
you, Gilda and Ariel, for summarizing our discussion, and in the name of equity, I'm donating my reaction time to Tim.
No.
I would like to do that. Please let me do that.
Well, I'm sorry that I gave the impression of being authoritarian, but I thought we'd agreed that we wouldn't have a further discussion because of time. We're thinking of your coffee. But I do have an opportunity to say a few words, and so not delay you beyond too far for coffee. But I'm speaking on behalf of all the members of the advisory board, including Francis Wesley, who's not able to be with us, who is the Professor and Director of the Centre for Innovation and Resilience in the University of Waterloo in Canada. And she'd been heavily involved with the working group, or Work Package 3, which is the group around the core part of this program, the transformative theory around TSI. So although she's not here, her contributions and her writing and her relationships with a large diaspora of people involved in social innovation have been all connected to the group led by Alex, and there are many in the room who've been part of that core group of Work Package 3. So though she's not here, she's very much part of the history. But this, on behalf of the 5 members of the panel, including myself, I want to say we began all this in January 2014, quite deliberately to have a panel that was genuinely a very mix of people with backgrounds in government, backgrounds in bureaucracy, backgrounds in idealism, and backgrounds in practicalities, and coming from different parts of the European Union with different perspectives on transformative change. And I think it's been one of the great journeys that we've had a group of people who have come with us and also met with you in a variety of ways. We haven't just come to the main plenary meetings, which have been 3 that we've been directly involved, but actually on a one-to-one basis we've been interacting with the researchers in a variety of ways. And I personally have been very much involved with my colleagues in Drift, Flora and Julia, and the whole team in Drift. So my first comment really is that in this wonderful phase of the interaction between the panel and the whole of the group, and there has been a very constructive, exciting, valuable dialogue. And it is actually important to say, when it's taxpayers' money in a scheme which has got a lot of millions of euros in it, and a large number of researchers and many related partners of one kind or other that you represent in this room, this has been a great value for the effort put in. And not all these European funded schemes have the payoff this one's offered. So I really want to congratulate everyone involved that that's been the case. And it's worth commenting that as far as I know, I've tried to get this count, 6 children have been born out of the transit team. And as far as I know, and I know there's one certainty, there's 2 on the way. So it's quite an achievement and nothing else we have procreated into the future. My second point is actually that the nature of an exercise like this, and Gilda's, I think, gave a very powerful presentation, but it needs to be sort of set in the context that you're all so terribly nice. And I don't mean that just because I want to be nice to you. You are actually nice. And people who are nice have fun. People who are nice think about other questions than just the technicalities of writing papers. People who are nice have a way of conversing and make you remember some of the conversations years later. And this is part of what transformation is about. It's not only being nice, but being nicer as you're being nice, because you're learning so much from each other. I found this particular week, and these few days in particular, especially, exceptionally exciting. And because I've had these conversations with many of you. This leads me to a very interesting remark that I feel is what might be the kinds of, there's a memory of transit. We always talk about memories, and you have an indelible memory, which will be the contribution of all the documents that Flo touched on yesterday morning, and the famous manifesto that I know Flo will say something more about, but I want to reinforce. The manifesto is a new idea, and it's a very important one. It's kind of a statement not far away from what Gilda was talking about, of reaching out and saying, what should we be looking at? Now, the comments I've been making from talking to many of you, particularly we had this very important meeting at lunchtime yesterday with the people from the policy making community, is that there are 3 or 4 areas that I really would urge transit not to lose sight of in its prospective writing its papers and looking at where it might go and where it might influence the world. It doesn't necessarily mean there's another transit or a transit 2 or 3. It means that there is this kind of work done by you in a variety of ways. A wage or an income or whatever it is becomes accepted. In a society which is fragmented and disillusioned, and a lot of this came up in our discussion yesterday in basic income, you have fracturing, and that any language you use becomes a language of contention. So we're aiming to reach out, and Gilda's message I think was the important one of the 3 this morning, but all of us were saying important things to you, is we need to find a way where this kind of contention is less persistent, less cantankerous, less antagonistic, because we're actually working toward a common aim. And that's a really important part of TSI, of social transformative, of social innovation. The second thing, and Julian, I don't mind singing him out, and I started talking about this, why don't we apply this to a whole community, to a community of something like 50,000, big enough to be properly managed and run, and small enough to be transformative in its totality. And it deals with the issue that both Ariel and Edina have come up with about inclusion. How do we get the people who are hard to reach, who are the far end of the scale in terms of economic opportunity, who are politically disenfranchised, and getting them into the notion of transformative change for the benefit of everyone. I think that's a terrific challenge. I know that people in Drift and others are thinking about these things, but it's something which I believe should be given a greater degree of encouragement. So I'd like to see some discussion involving 4 or 5 communities. It might say, why aren't we beginning to be templates, led by our policymaker friends, so they're the ones who could help us design that in a creative way. And that's the second thing which I think is really worthwhile. The third one, and I talked to our friend from the European Commission, and I'm beginning to get a sense that inside the Commission is a recognition that another kind of social economy, which is much more on the lines that Gilda particularly touched on, is in the sights of the Commission. And we need to be thinking about a society which is much more giving and sharing and taking into account the idea of care and empathy and building that into the recognition of the way in which we always have to give back as much as we take away. And that notion is actually part of what I was picking up from the Commission. So I think there's a resonance in the Commission for some of the ideas from transit to be converted in this perspective mode into the kind of thinking the Commission itself might lead in a series of policy-related workshops. So I see that even if transit as a phenomenon ends in December, and then I know there are stepping stones between now and then, which we don't need to go into here, the memory needs to be seen as a complete reinversion of that into a prospect. That what you've learnt, what you've offered, what you've created, what you've shared with people become a device for further intervention in a whole host of different ways. And I would urge our friends in the whole transit team to lay out, and this is where the manifesto comes in, some of those avenues which lead not to the cul-de-sac but to the open meadows of change. And I leave you with a thought of being collectively sharing, that in the spirit in which this wonderful meeting has taken place, fantastically well run by the people in Drift, beautifully led and shaped by Flor Julia and her key colleagues that I've been working with, and the fact that we have a team here that has constantly been with us and actively engaged is a signal that this has been a very important family-type experience. It's not just a bunch of researchers. It's not driven by technical argument and lots of diagrams and long words. It's actually got a sense of being nascent, beginning to be born again out of the change of brain. And why are we doing that? Because we live in hope. The great human condition is never to despair. And the greatest writers, the greatest musicians, the greatest thinkers, the greatest poets always have given us an opportunity to see there's something better out there than we think there is. And if we keep doing that, we'll get to a world where some of the issues that we're raising in this meeting today, which are still contested, to use a very social science word, become accepted because the conditioning around which these ideas are given their airing have become more amenable. And that is the hope. It'll be a different kind of society, and Gilda touched on that, and it'll be a society which embraces the globe, and Ariel touched on that, and will bring in the natural world and the changing way in which we as a society, as human beings, interpret ourselves, which is what Edina touched on. If we have all of these things together, transit will have left its mark. And from that mark is a springboard. And the springboard is what we take away after this meeting. So we wish you collectively from our advisory board here, not only well, but great joy working with you in a variety of ways over the years to come. This is not a process that ever has an end. Good luck to you all. Thank you for listening and spending the time with us.